title I gave the Mises Institute was Why the Constitution Had to Be Destroyed. That was many months ago, but I think I should have added a subtitle of And How They Did It. And that's going to be the bulk of my talk, and how they did it. And of course, the Constitution has been effectively destroyed. There really are no constitutional limits on the growth of government anymore. Judge Andrew Napolitano, in his book, The Constitution in Exile, noted that not a single federal law was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court from 1937 to 1995. So every once in a blue moon, you'll see the Supreme Court ruling in favor of the people and against the Washington establishment. But maybe not even a full moon. Every once a century now is the way it is. So essentially, we live in a regime of unlimited government. The only time Republicans ever really, apart from Ron Paul, ever talk about the Constitution is whenever they want to use it to block something the Democrats are trying to do. And the only time you ever hear a Democrat in Congress talking about the Constitution is when they want to try to use it to block something the Republicans are trying to do at the moment. But nobody believes in using it as a limit on governmental power, with the exception of Ron Paul and a few others. In fact, 5 or 6 years ago, Congressman Paul invited me to speak to his Liberty Caucus in Washington in his office. It was about 10 or 11 members of Congress who were like-minded, and in some of the names would be familiar to most of you, I suppose. And one of the things these members of Congress all nodded their heads to was when one of them said, "You can no longer be taken seriously in Congress if you make constitutional arguments against any governmental program." And so our rulers understand this. They've won. They've succeeded. And so I thought it would be useful to try to tell the story of how this came about and why the Constitution had to be destroyed, based on some of my research in economic history. And I'm going to just read you the answer. This is why the Constitution had to be destroyed, in my opinion. So I guess I can sit down after I read this paragraph here. This was a statement by the late Murray Rothbard in one of his books about the very beginning of the American Republic. About the very beginning of the American Republic, there always were the two factions in American politics. You had the nationalists who wanted a powerful central government that would be very active and do all sorts of bad things. And then you had the Jeffersonian wing, the decentralists, who wanted limited decentralized government, limited taxation, and so forth. And we've throughout the whole history of the country, we've had a back and forth battle between the nationalists and the centralizers on the one hand, and the decentralizers and the more libertarian wing of American politics on the other. And here's how Rothbard described the nationalists. And of course, Alexander Hamilton has always been looked at as the intellectual leader of the so-called nationalists of that time. What were they about? What did they want at the beginning of the Republic when the American Revolution ended? Here's what they wanted, according to Rothbard. They wanted, quote, I'm quoting, to reimpose in the new United States a system of mercantilism and big government similar to that in Great Britain, against which the colonists had rebelled. The object was to have a strong central government, particularly a strong president or king as chief executive, built up by high taxes and heavy public debt. The strong government was to impose high tariffs to subsidize domestic manufacturers, develop a big navy to open up and subsidize foreign markets for American exports, and launch a massive system of internal public works. In short, the United States was to have a British system without Great Britain. That's Murray Rothbard. And Alexander Hamilton actually labeled this system the American system. How's that for Orwellian double talk? He wanted a clone of the British mercantilist system that the revolution had just been fought against, and they wanted to call it the American system. And so if you break this down, what did they want? A centralized state where political power was totally centered in the federal government, heavy federal taxes and debt, discriminatory taxes. High tariff would be a discriminatory tax, and the original Constitution prohibited discriminatory taxation altogether. They wanted corporate welfare run amok, essentially, and aggressive militarism. Does any of that sound familiar to anybody? What country might you describe that is characterized today by these things that you might be familiar with? Of course, that's our system today. And so I'm going to argue that that was why the Constitution had to be destroyed, because the Constitution did not, neither did the Articles of Confederation, certainly create a highly centralized state with heavy federal taxes and debt, discriminatory taxes, corporate welfare run amok, and aggressive militarism. That was not the system. So a very long, decades-long campaign or crusade had to be waged in a lot of different areas, in the courts, in politics, and elsewhere, to destroy the Constitution so that this would be allowed, so that this would come into being. And at the beginning of the American Republic, the proponents of this, of course, were the Hamiltonians, Hamilton himself, people such as Chief Justice John Marshall, Justice Joseph Story, Supreme Court Justice, Daniel Webster, Henry Clay, and Abraham Lincoln. Those were the nationalists up until the Civil War era. The opponents of all this were the Jeffersonians, Jefferson himself, Madison, Monroe, Andrew Jackson, President John Tyler, and people of that sort.